the separation that you're making here, what's the core difference essentially is what I'm asking. One is a religion and one is a political body, or how would you put it in layman's terms without...
Judaism is a religion. Being Jewish means that you were given a covenant by God to fulfill 613 commandments.
Yeah.
The whole entire world is obligated by what we call the Noahide laws. Noah was given, let's just put it that way, 7 commandments for his seed. And at Mount Sinai in the biblical story, so the Jews were given the Torah and 613 commandments. Anybody who is obligated to fulfill those 613 commandments, that means he's Jewish. In fact, every time you see the word Jew, you could replace it and throw in someone who's commanded in 613 commandments.
Right, okay.
And that's basically it.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they're developed around that community that was there at Mount Sinai that accepted the Torah, an entire, I wouldn't say culture, but an entire way of life based on the 613 commandments. There was no Jewish culture per se. There are Jews all over the world. There are Jews in Germany, European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Germany, France, Hungary, Poland. My family's from Poland. And then there are Jews in Yemen, Morocco, Syria. There are Jews in Ethiopia. So there's black Jews and white Jews, and the cultures have nothing to do with each other. We'll take the Syrian Jews or the Yemenite Jews. Their dress was more Arabic than the Ashkenazi Jews.
Right.
They literally would wear turbans and robes, and my son has a friend whose grandfather there's a picture of his grandfather on the wall. He's sitting on a carpet with a hookah and an earring, and he was an Orthodox Jew.
So the culture differs.
The culture of the Arab Jews was very Arabic. Their music of the Arabic Jews, the Jewish music, is Arabic. Their accent, even their Hebrew accent, it sounds much more Arabic than it does Ashkenazi Hebrew. So, for example, we don't have in Ashkenazi Hebrew a W sound.
Okay.
It's a V instead of a W. But many Sephardi Jews do have a W sound.
Right.
And that's an Arabic thing. In Yiddish, there's no W sound. In fact, I was once listening to a Sephardic rabbi speak, and he was talking about the letter of the Aleph base, the Hebrew alphabet. Yeah. He was talking about the wow.
Yeah.
I was thinking, what is a wow? And then I realized he meant what we call the letter Vav.
Okay.
In his accent, it's a wow. Their accent is Arabic. Their culture is their food is Arabic. They eat lahmacun and not gefilte fish.
Right.
They eat Arabic food. They have Arabic culture. The common denominator is the religion. That's it. The 613 commandments. Then, of course, there are the converts who are Jews. You can convert to Judaism.
Right, yeah.
Right? Donald Trump's daughter is a convert to Judaism. So the common denominator between all Jews is the being commanded in 613 commandments. There have been Jews that don't believe in the commandments. They don't believe in the whole story.
Meaning they're born from a Jewish mother, but
correct.
They sort of are not convinced by God.
They're atheists.
Right.
Or they're semi-atheists or whatever they may be. Or perhaps like many of the original Zionists were once religious and then threw it away.
Right.
So a lot of them just didn't want to be Jews because what's the point? And they tried assimilating into the non-Jewish worlds, but it didn't work because the anti-Semites persecuted them as Jews. So now they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. They didn't want to be Jews because the definition of a Jew, the idea of a Jew, was the religious Jew.
What time period are you talking about here?
Late 1800s.
Okay.
And the non-Jewish world, the anti-Semites, wouldn't let them be non-Jews. So they had to have all these different definitions of Jews. So then there were various different answers to what to do. So there were Jewish communists, and if you believe in communism, it's because everybody's treated equally.
Right.
And so they figured Jews will be treated with equal standing if communism is implemented. And one of the ideas was Zionism, because during that time period, nationalism was a big thing.
Right, yeah.
People were becoming nations and nation states and nation building. So they figured, you know what, if we do this to the Jews, then we could change our entire identity and personality and everything. And instead of being people that we have to do something, and instead of being people that commanded to do these commandments and stuff, the Jews are going to be a nationality.
Right.
Especially since at the time they were already evangelical Christians, the Protestants, who believed that the Jews are going to return to their lands before the second coming of Jesus. And they actually started Zionism. Many ideas that we attribute to Jews mistakenly, many even sayings and ideas and concepts and even biblical interpretations were actually evangelical Christian. So the idea, for example, I'm sure you've heard it, that the Israel or Palestine was to the Jews a land without a people for a people without a land. Who invented that? The evangelicals. The evangelicals were the first to say that. The idea to speak Hebrew. Why would the Jews speak Hebrew? The Jews haven't spoken Hebrew for thousands of years, and there's no reason for them to speak Hebrew. In fact, they purposely abandoned Hebrew because Hebrew is a holy language. And once upon a time when the Jews were very holy and they were in holy places, so they spoke Hebrew biblical times. But afterwards, they abandoned Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic, a dialect of Aramaic.
Right.
And then they spoke whatever languages in the lands they ended up. The Arabic Jews have friends, Orthodox Jews. They live in Brooklyn, from Syria, originally, Aleppo, Damascus, and they call Hashem Allah. And instead of Im Yirtzeh Hashem to say God willing, they say Inshallah.
Right.
I learned all sorts of Arabic expressions from them.
So the culture you're arguing here is totally separate between these different groups of Jews.
There's nothing to discuss. Of course,
but there's a common ancestry. If you go back in time,
well,
they were all, it was the tribe that was, the four mothers of, I'm often hearing, was it four mothers of the tribe, right?
Well, there were four mothers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah.
Right.
Those were the wives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
Which is fine, except that because
the argument, sorry to cut you off, that those that state that Judaism and Zionism are synonymous.
Yeah. And so far, I haven't heard any reason why they should be even similar. But
or that Jews are a race, for example, or they share a culture. Or they argue, for example, that they share this lineage. If you go back, this ancestral lineage.
From who?
Which is this question that I was asking you just now.
Well, as you know, Abraham had two sons, Isaac, Yitzchak, and Yishmael. And the Arabs are descendant of Yishmael.
Yeah.
So the Jews and the Arabs are one race also then, right? Because we're all descended from Abraham. That's why they call it Abrahamic religions, correct?
Right.
Does that make any sense? Or, let's go
They don't usually include Islam.
Why? But why? Islam is a religion, which is, 1,500 years old, let's say, roughly. That's a religion. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about descent. And if you're talking about descent, then why not make all Abraham's children cousins, right? One big tribe. Or Isaac himself had two sons, Yaakov and Esau. And the Romans tradition tells us, and other non-Jewish nationalities come from Esau. So what is this idea of common descent? First of all humans have common descent from Adam, right? And then there's Noah. Everybody comes from Noah because there was the flood, right? And so where do you draw your taxonomy lines over here to say, okay, well, these four women, you may be referring to something else. Besides the biblical story, there's some theory of DNA that 30%, I think it is, that's approximate to the best of my memory, of Ashkenazi Jews come from 4 particular women. That's Ashkenazi Jews, and what made those women Jewish, and why use those 4? It doesn't make any sense, the idea that Jews are a race. How could they be a race? You have Ethiopian Jews, you have German Jews, blonde hair, blue-eyed German Jews, you have converted Jews. How in the world can you convert to a race? More than that. First, how can you convert to a race? Secondly, you have Jews of all different races. Third, as you know, according to Jewish law, if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. If your mother is not Jewish, you're not. Even if your father is Jewish, does that follow the rules of how races are normally understood? No. Because whether you're Jewish or not follows Judaic halachic law. Halacha, Torah in Arabic would be Sharia.
Right.
According to our Sharia, if your mother is commanded to fulfill the 613 commandments, you are now commanded as well. That doesn't follow father. Actually, in Judaic law, there were 12 tribes. Jacob had 12 tribes for children. And and each tribe had their own flag, they had their own symbol, they had their own, I don't want to say culture, but they had their own, let's say, way of living or mannerisms.
Right.
Yeah. And the law is in Judaism that if somebody marries outside of the tribe, a different tribe, a Jewish person, the family affiliation depends on paternal lineage, not on the mother. So if you're from tribe A, the father's from tribe A and the mother's from tribe B, the kid is from tribe A. Regarding inheritance and tribal affiliation, it all follows the father. The only thing that follows the mother is how many commandments are you obligated to fulfill? 613 or 7. Now, there's a whole theology behind this. The whole theology of Judaism is that we're here in the world temporarily, and there is an afterlife that goes on forever, and whatever commandments we fulfill in this world stay with us forever. It's kind of like, as our sages say, today is the day we work, and then we just get the reward, or we reap the benefits of our work, spiritual work in this world. So, every individual has an individual job in the world. God decides what time and place everybody is put. He decides whether you're a man or a woman. He decides your various circumstances, because the world it's like an individual test. God takes a soul and then he says, okay, what tests do I want to give this soul? That'll decide if he's rich or poor, if he's Jewish or non-Jewish. If he's non-Jewish, he has a choice to be Jewish. If he's Jewish, he doesn't have a choice to be non-Jewish. God decides whether he wants to give him a choice or not. God decides where in the timeline he's born. If he's born in the days of the prophets, or he's born in the days of, I don't know, Donald Trump. What country is he born in, etc. And there's a whole theology about this world being just kind of a graphic user interface. The whole material world is just a front for a spiritual world. And a person's spiritual status is really his core being. And the material world are just tools to fulfill God's commandments.
Just a quick question, just circling slightly back. What do you understand a race or ethnicity to be?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. I know that there are different ideas of what race or ethnicity is, but pick your choice. None of those ideas, none of them fit the Jews. Let me succinctly repeat that. There is no common denominator.
But does it have to be one singular common denominator?
Tell me it could be more than one thing, but you tell me, just give me any logically coherent and intellectually consistent criterion or criteria of what makes somebody Jewish.
No, the thing is, the point I'm trying to make here is all of these things, race, culture and so on, they can all be put down to essentially like social constructs,
Fine, so let them be.
But what's wrong with it? What's wrong with there being a Jewish social construct aside from the religion. Let's say if they call it something else. Let's say if they didn't use the word Jew or Judaism, but the same group of people said, look, we have a mixture of a shared lineage. We have a mixture of a shared culture. Some the Ashkenazi Jews between themselves have a similar culture.
To an extent, right?
Right, like the.
Well, here's the answer to your question: who are you going to put in this group? In other words, how are you
but
going
this
to
is precisely my point.
Let's say there's
it's a social construct.
No, but who socially constructed it, and what's the criteria of being in that group? In other words, you just said you have a group. There's no such thing as Jews, so you have a group of people.
No, I'm not saying there's no such thing as Jews.
But let's say there would be no such thing as Jews.
Okay.
Let's not use that word, right?
Okay, yeah, I'm just saying they take a different term.
So but what unites the people under that term, whatever you want to use? Nothing. Yeah. There is nothing.
No, but why does it have to be one singular?
Give me two things. Give me any amount of things. Give me any criteria that you choose. Anything. Could stay here all night if you like.
I'm saying if you take the Ashkenazi Jews, they will have a similar culture between themselves.
That's true. Yeah? The Ashkenazi Jews
the
too.
Sephardic Jews,
fine, but
they will have some similar culture.
That's true. But
you can go back in their lineage, and there is a common ancestry.
Yeah, sure, Abraham.
Right, and my point is, okay, that you'll argue, for example, well, the Arabs could be part of that. But
yes.
What I'm saying is, all these things are social constructs. So one can construct. You can draw the lines where you want. Essentially,
no, you can't.
I think. Can I give you one example? Can I give you an example?
Go ahead.
Because, for example, I'm ethnically or racially, ethnically, I think they call it, a Pakistani lineage. Now, Pakistan just so happens to have coincidentally been, granted independence from India in 1947 as well. So, on a paper, I tick, ethnically I'm Pakistani. But if I go back 100 years, actually my ethnicity is now on paper the same as the guys on the other side of the border.
Fine.
My point being, this is all just made up.
That's true.
By humans.
That's true.
So why can't they make their own thing up?
Because they can, but there is nothing that they made up. Meaning, what do you mean made up? In the example you gave. So you have a common denominator that you and all the other Pakistanis are a group.
Just the border, yeah.
The border. That's a border, and it's made up. But you do have a common denominator, made up, granted. But it is common. We're all Pakistanis, or we're all Indians, or we're all Pakistanis of those people who were once Indians. Any criteria you want, make up your own club. But there has to be a common denominator between them to be in the same club. The Jews have none, nothing, zero. What in the world does a atheist, German Jew, who's married to a Christian, let's say, who celebrates Christmas, doesn't believe in God, doesn't celebrate any Jewish holidays, no religion at all, have in common with a Yemenite religious Jew? What? Tell me, are they from the same border? No.
No,
are they from the same lineage? No.
In that instance, they would argue that they do have a similar lineage going further,
How far back? To Abraham? But then we have the Arabs. Tell me at what point...
But this is my point. It's a social construct.
No, but what is the construct? There is no possible construct that unites these people.
Well, they exclude the Arabs in this construct.
But so what are they including? Tell me, when they decided to make this synthetic construct, describe the construct. It has to have some criteria. Otherwise, how do you know if you're Jewish or not?
Yeah, it's a mixture.
Well, good. Tell me what the mixture is.
Okay, well, from my understanding, it's essentially... they look at lineage, so are either of your parents Jews and so on, or your grandparents?
No, you mean according to Jewish law, if your mother is Jewish.
I'm not talking about the religion here per se. I'm talking about the sort of social construct that they have.
But who's they? Who are these Jews?
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily.
Who are these people? When you say it's a social construct, besides, you can't do that. You can't say you look at what's a Jew. You look at one of your parents and say if they're Jews, that makes you a Jew. You can't use the word you're defining in the definition. In other words, if I say, "What's a dog?"
I understand.
And you can't say, "Right, if you were born from two dogs, that makes you a dog." You can't do that. You can't say what's a Jew? Well, if one of your parents are Jewish, that makes you a Jew. That's not a definition. You can't use the word that you're defining as part of the definition. You need to give me any criteria you want. I'll give you anything you want. That you have a population, let's say synthetically constructed, called Jews, or anything you want to call
No, but that
them.
is always the case, though, isn't
No,
it?
that's fine, but it doesn't work with the Jews because there is no either synthetic or organic common denominator between them at all. There's nothing. In your case, you could say you're Pakistani. I could say all left-handed people who when they play baseball, they bat right and they throw left, and they're born while there was a war anywhere in the world, and they like spaghetti. I could make that one group of people if I want, but anybody who is in my group has to fill those criteria.
They don't have to fill every criteria.
Give me any criteria. In other words, I'm making the group. I could do whatever I want, right? If I say, okay, one of these 6 things, fine. Give me the criteria within which all Jews fall.
So let's say there are 6 things, for example.
You won't find any.
And you just have to tick one of them.
There are none. There are none.
I'm saying, okay, let's say either of your parents. I mean, you have a
Now you can't do that. You can't say either of your parents are Jewish. You got to explain what a Jew is. You can't do that.
Okay, so are you saying the issue here is we're not able to define from the get-go what a Jew is?
No, we are able to define, and we always have defined. It's very simple. If you have a chair and you do not want to accept the definition of a chair, and let's just say somebody's going to write in the comments, oh, that's not the definition of a chair. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument,
sure, yeah.
The definition of a table is a platform that you put things on that has legs that can stand on its own. Now somebody comes, a group of people, I don't accept that's the definition of a table. See that thing over there, that table? That's not what I defined it as. That's not the definition. Okay, fine. Give me a definition. And you can't. That's the problem. We know what a Jew is. Everybody knew once upon a time what a Jew is. The Jews always defined themselves in this way until this idea of secular Judaism came, or Zionist Judaism, and now they cannot define what a Jew is. The Zionists tried. They don't have an idea. Jabotinsky held that the Jews are a race. Ben-Gurion said there is no definition of a Jew. Jews don't have a definition. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Yes, but if it doesn't have a definition, then how do you know you're a Jew? In Israeli law, if you, by the law of return I'm talking about, if you're born Jewish, I say me, and I would one day, or somebody, not me, I'm not going to do it, would decide one day to convert to another religion. Guess what? According to the law of return, he's not Jewish.
But that's the state and its policies.
Fine, but they're defining what a Jew is. And it's inconsistent. What I'm saying is, it's not that we don't know what a Jew is. We do know what a Jew is. But if you don't want to agree, then fine, no problem. Give me another definition. And now because you will not be able to give me an alternative definition, and by that I mean any logically coherent and consistent definition that you're willing to say that if you have these or any of these characteristics, give me a choice, whatever you want, that's a Jew. And if you don't have any of these characteristics or all these characteristics, you're not a Jew. Give me any criteria. Nobody ever came up with any because there were none. Jews are around for thousands and thousands of years, and this is how we always defined ourselves until there came this idea of secular Jews. So I'll give you an example. I have over here.
Yeah.
And here's where Zionism starts. I have over here a copy of an article from a Zionist publication called The Maccabean.
All right, yeah.
August 1902. Okay? This article is called Dr. Herzl's Evidence Before the Royal British Commission on Alien Immigration. So he was talking to this Royal British Commission on Alien Immigration. There was various dignitaries from Britain, and they were talking to Theodor Herzl about a Jewish state and Jewish nationalism.
What year was this, sorry? Or approximately?
This is a good question. In 1902.
Okay.
It looks like July 7th, 1902. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay, it was 16th sitting of the Royal Commission of Alien Immigration. So they asked Herzl, well, definition. Major Evans Gordon asked, would you say briefly what your views are to Herzl about Jewish nationalism? Answer. Herzl responds, I will give you my definition of a nation, and you can add the adjective Jewish. A nation is, in my mind, a historical group of men of a recognizable cohesion held together by a common enemy. That is, in my view, a nation. Then if you add to that the word Jewish, you have what I understand to be the Jewish nation. So they asked, what would be the common enemy in this case? Herzl's answer, the anti-Semite. Meaning,
Yeah.
The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre also said this, but Herzl said it first.
Right.
The definition of a Jew, according to Theodor Herzl, is whoever the anti-Semites hate.
Yeah.
Now, there's a problem with this.
Kind of anti-Semitic, maybe.
First of all, yes, honestly, I can't think of anything more anti-Semitic
Like
than
your
to define
enemy.
my Jewishness by being hated by the anti-Semites, but worse. Go ask an anti-Semite, how do you know who to hate? Who's a Jew? So I did actually. I won't mention his name, but I once asked a world-famous anti-Semite.
Okay. I'll kind of want to know who it is, but okay.
I'll tell you offline.
Sure.
Actually, he's from England. But I asked a world-famous anti-Semite, I said, who do you decide as a Jew?
Yeah.
So he says, whoever identifies as a Jew, I look at as a Jew. So now you have the Jew, Herzl, saying, whoever the anti-Semite hates is a Jew. The anti-Semite says, whoever identifies as a Jew, I hate.
Yeah.
So you have the anti-Semite saying, whoever identifies as a Jew, and the Jew saying, whoever this guy hates, if he hates me, I'm a Jew. And the anti-Semite saying, if he identifies as a Jew, I hate him. Doesn't make any sense. Without anti-Semites, there wouldn't be Jews. Now, by the way, this explains a lot about Zionism.
Okay, yeah.
First of all, you may have heard, I've heard it so many times, that, well, when you say that the definition of a Jew is such and such according to Jewish law, they'll say, yes, but Hitler didn't distinguish between this kind of Jew or that kind of Jew.
Right.
So let's psychoanalyze the mind that would give Hitler the right to define who a Jew is. He becomes the rabbi.
Yeah.
Don't forget, Jews have been around for thousands of years.
Yes.
Hitler was not. But Hitler gets to define who a Jew is? Like, what kind of crazy thing is that? That is a evolved version of Theodor Herzl's theory, that the anti-Semite gets to define a Jew. There is no intrinsic reason why anybody would identify as a Jew per se. It is only the anti-Semites that made them into Jews. In fact, as I mentioned before, people like Herzl didn't want to be Jewish. In fact, he had a plan to convert all Jews to Christianity. It's in his diary. It was more like a dream. And one Sunday afternoon, all the Jews are going to go to the church. He's going to be the last surviving Jew. They're all going to go convert to Christianity, and that'll be the end of anti-Semitism. He preferred Christianity to Judaism, by the way. You know, there's an old Jewish joke. What's the difference between Jesus and Herzl?
Right.
Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. Herzl celebrated Christmas. Okay? But the only reason why these early Zionists had any interest in being Jewish is, as I mentioned, because the anti-Semites persecuted them as Jews. So now their entire identity is being hated. Could you imagine what that does to a person?
Yeah, psychologically.
The entire identity is being hated. This is Theodor Herzl, the father of political Zionism. And a modern version of this is, well, Hitler didn't distinguish between, let's say, a religious or a non-religious Jew, or that's, I can't imagine something besides it's anti-Semitic, obviously,
Yeah.
but something so repulsive that I should define my identity based on the fact that certain people hate me. That's crazy. But then these people become a nationality. And by the way, Herzl said all nations are like that, a common enemy. So it makes French people French is, I don't know, because the English don't like them or they have an enemy or something like that. That is the borders of a nation. And the Jews, that's what he said, that's a nation in general, a historical group of with cohesion. I'm not sure exactly how he would fit the Jews into that part of his definition.
Right.
But this idea that united by a common enemy.
Right.
I'm sorry. You know what unites the Jews? Our religion. You don't want to be united with me? So you're not. But that's all my Jewishness is a relationship with God. And yes, because of the theology, my fellow Jews are close to me, just like members of all religions have a connection with each other. There are responsibilities Jews have for others. And there's a whole theology about, as I mentioned, a spiritual world where Jews are connected spiritually to each other. But if you don't believe in the religion, I don't believe, and nobody was able to give me a coherent argument against this. If somebody doesn't believe in the religion, then what is his connection with me? Culture? I'll tell you something about Jewish culture, Ashkenazi culture. There is American Jewish culture and British Jewish culture. They're different. And the British Jews took on some of the British mannerisms culture-wise. You know, like Americans are more, I guess they speak, let's say, more aggressive or blunt, you know, than the British. The British Jews, the Orthodox Jews are like that too. And if you go, I could take you to a Jewish commercial neighborhood here where all the restaurants are. You know what the Jewish food is? Mostly? Sushi and pizza.
Yeah.
That's mostly the Jewish food. There is no Jewish culture. There is communities of the Jews that created cultures, like all communities. There is not only Ashkenazi culture, but the Manhattan, the New York type, Upper West Side, non-religious Jewish culture. But that's not anything that unites Jews. The question is, what determines if somebody's Jewish? Simple question. What determines if somebody's Jewish? I'll give you a very simple answer. If according to the Torah, he's obligated to fulfill 613 commandments. That's it. Not 99% of the time, 100% of the time.